In 1649, when the viceregal authorities finally forced their way into the convent of Santa Magdalena de los Valles in Oaxaca, they found something that the official documents described only as evidence of practices contrary to Christian doctrine. However, a secret testimony written by a royal scribe, hidden for 376 years in the archives of Seville, revealed a far darker truth. Over the course of 5 decades, 847 women had entered that convent, but by 1900, only 23 appeared in the official death records. What had happened to the remaining 824? The answer was buried within the secret accounting books of the Montemayor family, which listed each of those lives as processed merchandise. This is the story the church tried to erase forever, but that the documents could never hide. Before we dive into this disturbing tale that shook the foundations of colonial Mexico, if you dare to uncover secrets that few channels ever reveal, subscribe to our channel. This content isn't for everyone, only for the bravest souls who seek the truth without censorship. And let us know in the comments which country or city you're listening from, because this brotherhood of investigators extends throughout the Spanish-speaking world. In 1598, the prosperous city of Oaxaca was living through its golden years under Spanish rule. The valley stretched out, lush and fertile, nourished by crystal-clear rivers flowing from the Sierra Madre, while the bells of its 12 churches marked the rhythm of a deeply Catholic society. Among the surrounding hills, the air always carried the scent of copal and bougainvillea, mixed with the rich aroma of cacao roasting in the courtyards of colonial homes. The Montemayor family had arrived in New Spain barely 30 years earlier, yet they had already established themselves as one of the most influential dynasties in the region. Don Sebastián Montemayor, the patriarch, had first made his fortune in the silver mines, but his true genius lay in understanding that real power did not come from gold. It came from the control of consciences. That was why, when Don Sebastián proposed the construction of the convent of Santa Magdalena de los Valles, the ecclesiastical authorities welcomed the idea as a blessing from heaven. The convent was built on the outskirts of the city, on a hill from which one could gaze over the entire Oaxaca Valley. It was an imposing gray stone structure, with high walls that seemed designed not to keep the world out, but to keep something inside. Its northern tower rose toward the sky like an accusing finger, visible from anywhere in the city, a constant reminder that redemption was always within reach, for a price. Mother Dolores Montemayor, the youngest daughter of Don Sebastián, was appointed Mother Superior at the early age of 28. She was a woman of severe beauty, with amber-colored eyes that seemed to see directly into the soul of anyone who met her gaze. Her voice, always calm and soft, carried a strange power that made any woman who heard it feel instantly guilty of some unconfessed sin. She spoke of redemption with the passion of someone who had found her true calling, and her reputation for holiness spread throughout the region. The official purpose of the convent was noble: to offer refuge and redemption to the lost women of colonial society. Those who arrived were the ones who had broken social norms, those escaping violent marriages, or those who had been rejected by their families. The convent promised them 3 meals a day, a safe roof, honest work, and above all, the chance to cleanse their souls through prayer and penance. In those early years, the stories coming from the convent strengthened the faith of the entire region. It was said that Mother Dolores had the gift of transforming even the most lost women into examples of Christian virtue. The few who left the convent after completing their penance spoke wonders about the Mother Superior and how she had changed their lives. These women, always impeccably dressed and radiating an almost supernatural serenity, became the best ambassadors for the convent. Yet there was something unsettling in their eyes for those who had known them before, a kind of emptiness, as if something essential had been taken from their souls along with their sins. The first sign that something was not right in the convent of Santa Magdalena came in the spring of 1605, when a young mestiza named Esperanza Vasquez, barely 17 years old, was taken there by her own father. Esperanza had been caught in a forbidden relationship with the son of the alcalde mayor, the city's chief magistrate, and her family feared the social consequences of the scandal. On the morning she entered the convent, Esperanza carried with her a small silver rosary that had belonged to her late mother, and a love letter sewn into the hem of her dress. Her younger sisters watched her leave from the window of their home, while the cathedral bells rang mournfully under a cloudy sky that threatened rain. Don Esteban Vasquez, her father, had paid a considerable sum to ensure that his daughter received special treatment, one that would guarantee her complete spiritual transformation. Mother Dolores had smiled compassionately as he explained the situation, assuring him that within 6 months, Esperanza would be ready for a respectable marriage to a merchant who had already been contacted. 6 months passed. When Don Esteban returned to collect his daughter, Mother Dolores told him, with apparent sorrow, that Esperanza had developed a severe spiritual illness that required prolonged treatment. He was allowed to see her only briefly through the iron bars of a small window, her face gaunt, her eyes vacant, murmuring incoherent prayers. The Mother Superior explained that such crises were common when the soul fought against deep-rooted sins. Over the next 2 years, Don Esteban's visits became a painful routine. Each month he arrived with hope, and each month, Mother Dolores gave him the same answer. Esperanza was improving, but she was not yet ready. Sometimes he was not allowed to see her at all, because she was said to be in intense spiritual retreat in the convent's north tower. It was during one of those visits, in the autumn of 1607, that Don Esteban noticed something that deeply unsettled him. As he was leaving the convent, he saw a woman working in the gardens, and she was wearing his daughter's silver rosary. When he asked to speak to that woman, he was told she had died of a fever the previous week. That night, Don Esteban could not sleep. The rosary had been unique, crafted by a Zapotec goldsmith using a special technique with tiny pre-Hispanic symbols. There could not have been another like it anywhere in New Spain. When he returned to the convent the next morning demanding an explanation, he found the gates closed and a note waiting for him. It stated that Esperanza had died during the night, suffering from extreme melancholy, a condition that, according to Mother Dolores, afflicted young women who could not fully adapt to the religious life. Her body had already been buried in the convent cemetery, following the order's customs. Don Esteban never saw his wife's rosary again, nor was he ever allowed to visit his daughter's supposed grave. When he tried to file a formal complaint with the ecclesiastical authorities, he was informed that the case had already been investigated and that no irregularities had been found. Moreover, he was warned that his insistence could be interpreted as a lack of faith in divine will. But Don Esteban was not a man who gave up easily. He began asking discreet questions among other families who had sent women to the convent. What he discovered filled him with a deep anguish that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In the months that followed, he identified 7 more families who had gone through similar experiences. Women who had entered the convent and then vanished, either reported dead under mysterious circumstances or never heard from again. All the families had received similar explanations. All had paid generous donations, and all had been discouraged from investigating further. Rumors about the convent of Santa Magdalena began to spread like a silent illness through the cobbled streets of Oaxaca. In the parlors of the city's grand homes, among whispers and cautious glances, the women of high society shared unsettling stories, tales they dared not speak aloud during daylight. Dona Carmen Herrera, wife of the royal treasurer, had sent her illegitimate daughter to the convent in 1609 to conceal an inconvenient pregnancy. The young woman, named Catalina, was known for her rebellious nature and exceptional intelligence. According to Mother Dolores, Catalina had shown an unusual resistance to the process of spiritual purification and required special methods of reformation. The letters Catalina sent to her mother during her first months described a strict but bearable routine. She wrote about waking before dawn for morning prayers, spending long hours embroidering and sewing, taking classes in Christian doctrine, and eating frugal but sufficient meals. Her words revealed resignation, but also a quiet hope that one day she might return home. However, as months passed, Catalina's letters began to change in tone. Her handwriting, once firm and neat, became shaky and uneven. She described strange dreams in which her mother urged her to be patient, to accept her destiny. She mentioned constant headaches and a fatigue that no amount of rest could cure. In her final letter, dated March 1610, she wrote, "Dearest Mother, I no longer know whether what I see is real or visions that God sends me as a test. Mother Dolores says I must stop writing until my soul is fully purified." After that, silence. When Dona Carmen tried to visit her daughter, she was told that Catalina had entered a period of silent penance, during which she could receive no visits or correspondence from the outside world. Mother Dolores assured her that this was a necessary step in Catalina's spiritual transformation, and that any interruption could cause irreversible harm to her soul. Months turned into years, and Dona Carmen's worry slowly consumed her. Every Sunday after Mass, she would walk to the outskirts of the city to gaze at the convent from afar, hoping to see some sign of her daughter. Sometimes she thought she saw a figure at one of the windows of the North Tower, but she could never be sure. Then, one cold winter evening in 1612, during one of her lonely vigils, Dona Carmen witnessed something that filled her with terror. She saw a group of indigenous workers carrying several bundles wrapped in blankets from a rear door of the convent to a waiting cart on the road. The bundles were unmistakably human-shaped. She followed the cart discreetly and discovered that it was heading toward the abandoned mines in the mountains, places where no one dared go after nightfall. The next day, she gathered the courage to confront Mother Dolores directly about what she had seen. The Mother Superior received her with her usual serene smile, but there was something different in those golden eyes. With infinite patience, Dolores explained that the convent had an agreement with the local authorities to help transport the bodies of unclaimed indigents, poor souls who had died without family. It was, she said, an act of Christian charity to ensure they received a proper burial in consecrated ground. But when Dona Carmen asked specifically about her daughter, Mother Dolores fell silent for what felt like an eternity. Then, in a soft but firm voice, she said that Catalina had died the previous week from a sudden fever. Her body, she added, had already been transported to a special cemetery in the mountains, where she rested in peace among other purified souls. The news devastated Dona Carmen, but what tormented her most was that Mother Dolores showed not a trace of emotion as she delivered the news. No condolences, no comforting embrace, not even a tear in those golden eyes that observed her like a specimen under glass. That night, Dona Carmen made a decision that would change the course of events. She began keeping a detailed record of every woman she knew who had been sent to the convent, and vowed to uncover what had truly happened to each of them. The year 1615 brought the arrival of Sister Beatriz Mendoza to the convent of Santa Magdalena. Unlike the other women who entered those walls, Sister Beatriz was not a sinner seeking redemption. She was an experienced nun, sent from Mexico City to perform an administrative inspection of the institution. Officially, her visit was routine, but in truth, it had been prompted by the growing number of complaints from several influential families. Sister Beatriz was a woman of middle age, modest in appearance, but with sharp eyes. She had spent over 20 years managing convents across the viceroyalty, and her experience had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of corruption within religious institutions. She had a talent for blending in while observing everything. From her very first morning in the convent, she noticed things that disturbed her deeply. The silence was too absolute for a place that supposedly housed nearly 200 women. The few sisters she saw during morning prayers moved with an unnatural slowness, as if trapped in a perpetual dreamlike state. But what most unsettled her was the classification system that Mother Dolores had created. The women were divided into three categories. The penitents of minor grade, who lived in the convent's regular cells. The penitents of higher grade, who lived in the eastern wing and were rarely seen. And the special penitents, who, according to Mother Dolores, were in intensive retreat in the North Tower and could not be disturbed under any circumstances. If this revelation is already giving you chills, the narrator might say, hit the like button and share this story with someone who loves mysteries, because few dare to reveal what we're about to uncover. During her first weeks, Sister Beatrice tried to familiarize herself with the convent's records, but she constantly ran into obstacles. The books of admissions and deaths were incomplete, with pages torn out and dates that didn't match. When she asked about older archives, Mother Dolores explained that they had been damaged by humidity and sent away for restoration. Still, Beatrice managed to observe the daily operations of the convent. The minor penitents worked from dawn until nightfall in the textile workshops, producing embroidery and woven fabrics of astonishing quality. The work was meticulous and exhausting, yet the women carried it out with a devotion bordering on obsession. One morning, while supervising the main workshop, Sister Beatrice noticed a woman wearing a medallion that she immediately recognized. It was a unique piece that had once belonged to Esperanza Vasquez, the very girl whose death had been reported 8 years earlier. When Beatrice discreetly asked the woman about the medallion, the woman looked at her with glassy eyes and murmured something incoherent about gifts from sisters who had departed. That night, Sister Beatrice decided to investigate on her own. She waited until the bells struck midnight and slipped silently from her cell. The corridors were almost completely dark, lit only by a few votive candles that cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. As she walked toward the eastern wing, where the higher-grade penitents supposedly lived, she began to hear sounds that had no place in a convent at night. Soft moans, somewhere between pain and exhaustion, mixed with a rhythmic clacking that reminded her of an old loom from her childhood. When she reached the eastern wing, she discovered that the doors were locked with chains, something highly unusual in a place where the women were supposedly staying voluntarily to purify their souls. Through the tiny grated windows, she saw bent figures working by candlelight, their hands moving tirelessly across looms and embroidery frames. But what horrified her most was realizing that these women were working in the middle of the night, when they should have been sleeping. Their movements were mechanical, repetitive, devoid of awareness, as if they existed only to produce, not to live. Sister Beatrice's secret investigation deepened as she began to understand the true purpose of the sacred embroideries produced in the convent. During a seemingly casual conversation with Mother Dolores' steward, she learned that these textiles were being sold in the most exclusive markets of Mexico City and Puebla, and even exported to Spain, where the nobility purchased them as authentic works of religious art. The prices were astronomical for the time. A single embroidered tablecloth sold for the equivalent of a skilled artisan's yearly salary, and the most elaborate tapestries could fetch sums large enough to buy a small estate. The Montemayor family had built a vast economic empire on the labor of women who, according to every official record, were there voluntarily to purify their souls. But Sister Beatrice suspected the truth was far darker. Through her nightly observations, she noticed that the women of the Eastern Wing worked over 18 hours a day. Their meals consisted only of stale bread, water, and a thin soup with barely a trace of vegetables. Many showed visible signs of malnutrition and exhaustion. One night, while searching the convent basement for the old records that Mother Dolores claimed had been damaged by humidity, she stumbled upon something that froze her blood. Behind what appeared to be a solid wall, she discovered a hidden door, and beyond it, a secret room. Inside were dozens of personal belongings, Jewelry, rosaries, medallions, love letters, family portraits, all carefully cataloged and dated. Each item carried a label with a name and a date. She recognized several of those names. Women from families she had met in Mexico City. Women who had supposedly found peace in the convent and chosen to cut all contact with the outside world. But here were their most cherished possessions, abandoned in a secret chamber like macabre trophies. Among the objects, Beatriz found something that took her breath away: the personal diary of Catalina Herrera, the daughter of Dona Carmen. The entries were written in an increasingly trembling hand, revealing a reality completely different from the serene life described in the official letters. Catalina wrote about drugs mixed into the food, which caused mental confusion and obedience. She described brutal punishments for those who resisted, entire days without food or water. She mentioned women who simply disappeared in the night, and how their belongings were redistributed among the others to instill fear. The final diary entry, dated just 2 days before her official death, was especially chilling. "I can't pretend any longer. I know they plan to move me to the North Wing tomorrow. I've seen what happens to the women who go there. They never return. If anyone finds this diary, know that Mother Dolores is not what she seems. She and her family are." The entry ended abruptly, as if Catalina had been interrupted mid-sentence. At that moment, Sister Beatriz knew she had to reach the North Tower, no matter the risk. That was the final piece of the puzzle, the place where all the disappearances and contradictions would finally make sense. But she also knew that Mother Dolores had begun to suspect her. In recent weeks, Beatriz had noticed the woman's gaze growing sharper, her questions more pointed, and veiled suggestions that perhaps it would be better for her health to return early to Mexico City. The tension in the convent had reached a breaking point. Beatriz understood she had very little time before her investigation was discovered. So she made her decision. That very night, she would attempt to enter the North Tower, fully aware that she might not survive to tell what she found there. Midnight on October 23rd, 1615 marked the moment when the secrets of the convent of Santa Magdalena would finally be revealed. Sister Beatriz waited until the entire convent was silent. Then, with her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might betray her, she made her way toward the North Tower. The entrance lay at the end of a corridor that seemed deliberately designed to deter intruders. The walls were covered with religious paintings, their painted eyes appearing to follow her every movement, and the air grew heavier with a sweet, sickly odor that intensified with each step. The tower door was secured by 3 padlocks, but Beatriz had spent weeks observing Mother Dolores's routines and knew exactly where she hid the keys. With trembling hands, she opened the locks one by one, each metallic click echoing through the silence like thunder. When she finally opened the door, she was struck by a wave of foul, stagnant air that smelled of sickness, despair, and something else she couldn't immediately name. A spiral staircase led upward into darkness, but there was also a doorway leading down to what appeared to be the tower's basement. She chose to go down first. What she found there surpassed her worst nightmares. The underground chamber had been turned into a kind of infernal workshop. Dozens of women, some of whom Beatriz recognized as having supposedly died years before, were working in conditions of absolute slavery. They were chained to their workstations, iron shackles on their ankles allowing just enough movement to operate the looms and embroidery frames. Their physical state was horrifying, living skeletons with sunken eyes and mechanical movements that spoke of years of starvation and abuse. Many muttered prayers or numbers over and over, as if their minds had been reduced to a single reflex: work. And in the center of the room, supervising the night's labor, stood a woman whom Beatriz took several seconds to recognize. It was Mother Dolores, without her habit, without the symbols of her holy office. She appeared now as what she truly was, a merciless businesswoman, commanding a commercial empire built on human misery. Mother Dolores noticed Beatrice almost immediately, yet showed no surprise, no fear. Instead, she smiled with the same serene expression she had always worn. "Sister Beatrice," she said softly, "I wondered when your curiosity would finally bring you here. I hope you now understand why certain areas of the convent must remain private." Beatrice managed to find her voice after several failed attempts. "How? How can you justify this? These women are being tortured, enslaved." Mother Dolores interrupted her with a calm, almost maternal gesture. "These women," she said, "were problems for their families and for society. We have given them purpose. We have given them the chance to contribute to something greater than their small sins and transgressions. Look at the beauty they create, the perfection of their work. Is that not a higher form of existence than the wasted lives they led before?" As she spoke, Beatrice noticed the ledger books lying open on a nearby table. The numbers were staggering. The operation generated a fortune rivaling the richest silver mines in the entire viceroyalty. Each woman was recorded not as a person, but as a production unit, with notes on her output, health condition, and estimated lifespan. Mother Dolores slowly approached. "Do you truly believe anyone will take your word over mine?" she murmured. "Over the word of a family that has donated generously to the church for decades? Over the testimonies of the authorities who have inspected this convent and found it exemplary?" It was then that Beatrice realized the true scale of the conspiracy. The Montemayor family did not act alone. The local clergy, civil officials, and even some prominent merchants were involved. The sacred embroidery business was not merely a private enterprise. It was a network of corruption woven through the very heart of colonial power. "But," continued Mother Dolores, now only a few steps away, "I'm afraid this conversation cannot leave this room. I trust you understand." At that moment, Beatrice noticed that several of the chained women had stopped working and were staring at her. In their hollow eyes, she saw faint sparks of humanity, a flicker of something that refused to die. One of them, whom she recognized as Esperanza Vasquez, moved her cracked lips to form a single, silent word: "Run." What happened in the next few minutes would be forever burned into Sister Beatrice's memory. Taking advantage of a momentary distraction, she broke free from the basement and ran up the spiral staircase of the North Tower. Behind her, she heard shouts of alarm, footsteps closing in, but adrenaline gave her strength she never knew she possessed. At the top of the tower, she found the final confirmation of all her suspicions. The room was filled with documents, meticulously detailing the entire operation. Contracts signed with families to receive problematic women. Commercial agreements for the sale of the convent's textiles. Correspondence with European buyers. Even instructions describing how to keep the workers docile through drugs and deprivation. But the most horrifying discovery was that Santa Magdalena was only one part of a much larger network. The documents listed at least 5 other convents across New Spain operating under the same system. The Montemayor family had perfected a business model that turned human suffering into gold. Among the papers, Beatrice found letters revealing how victims were chosen. Families didn't just pay to get rid of troublesome women. The Montemayors themselves often targeted their victims. Wealthy widows with no male protector, women who had inherited property, or witnesses to crimes that needed to be silenced permanently. Beatrice quickly gathered several crucial documents, fastening them to her body beneath her habit. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs. Her pursuers were almost at the top. Driven by sheer desperation, she ran to the tower's only window, which opened onto the outer wall of the convent. The drop was fatal, but there was no other escape. She prayed, took a breath, and jumped. By a miracle of providence, she landed on a pile of straw, left behind for roof repairs on the stable below. The impact left her bruised, broken, but alive. Crawling through the darkness, she managed to reach the nearby forest, where she hid until dawn. At first light, Sister Beatriz Mendoza began her journey back to Mexico City. carrying the evidence that would expose one of the most systematic and horrifying crimes in the history of colonial Mexico. The official investigation that followed her testimony lasted 2 years. The viceregal authorities, initially skeptical, could not ignore the overwhelming evidence she presented. When they finally forced their way into the convent in 1649, they found exactly what Beatriz had described: an empire of slavery disguised as a religious institution. Of the 847 women who had entered the convent over 5 decades, only 156 were found alive, and many were so physically and mentally broken that they never fully recovered. The Montemayors had perfected a system in which women were literally worked to death, their bodies disposed of in the abandoned mountain mines once they could no longer produce. The trial of the Montemayor family became one of the greatest scandals of the entire viceroyalty. Confronted with undeniable evidence, Mother Dolores finally confessed, not only to the crimes committed at Santa Magdalena, but also revealing the locations of the other 5 convents in the network. Her confession filled 847 pages of testimony, describing in horrifying detail how they had turned faith into a tool of torture and exploitation. Yet, even in confession, Mother Dolores showed no remorse. Until her final day, she insisted that she had given purpose and discipline to women who otherwise would have wasted their lives in sin. The Montemayor family was publicly executed in the main square of Mexico City in 1651. Their vast properties were confiscated and distributed among survivors and the families of the victims. The convent of Santa Magdalena was demolished, stone by stone, and in its place a garden was planted, dedicated to the memory of tears that should never have been shed. The documents from the Montemayor case remained sealed in the archives of the Inquisition for more than 3 centuries. They were not made public until 1985, when Mexico partially opened its colonial records to researchers. Even today, many historians believe that the true scale of the Montemayor network was never fully revealed. Sister Beatriz Mendoza spent the rest of her life documenting similar cases of institutional abuse throughout New Spain. Her reports, known as the Mendoza Papers, revealed a disturbing pattern of corruption and exploitation that extended far beyond the convents. She died in 1634, at the age of 52, while investigating reports about a seminary in Puebla that showed suspiciously similar characteristics to those of Santa Magdalena. Some of the survivors of the convent managed to rebuild their lives, but many never recovered from the psychological trauma. Their testimonies, gathered during the trials, provide a chilling window into the systematic cruelty they endured. The story of the Convent of Eternal Tears reminds us that the most terrible crimes are often committed under the facade of virtue and holiness. The Montemayor family used the faith of a deeply Catholic society as a shield for their crimes, turning the hope of redemption into a deadly trap. But it also reminds us of the power of truth and the importance of questioning institutions, no matter how sacred they appear. Had Sister Beatriz Mendoza not dared to look beyond appearances, hundreds more women would have died in the shadows, their cries forever lost to history. This is the macabre story of the Montemayor family, a timeless warning that the most dangerous evil is the one disguised as good, and that the tears shed in silence are the ones that most desperately need to be heard.